Bristol, the rudest city in the UK. Hope Bristolians, as the inhabitants of Bristol are called, won't find it a rude shock to be named the rudest city in the UK. Whether they find it so or not, that's the brutal fact. We didn't discover the fact. It was discovered by one of the most credible e-learning platforms that surveyed more than 1,500 respondents from the 30 largest metropolitan areas and 19 largest cities in the UK, asking them to rate the rudeness of average residents of their respective cities on a scale of 1 to 10. And look, Bristol came out the rudest. This compels a fact-finding mission to see if Bristol is truly rude. Visiting Bristol, we found it exactly so, as you'll see in this video. Is the study reliable? It depends on what each person chooses to believe out of the available pieces of information, but the facts speak for themselves that the findings represent nothing but the reality. Next time you travel to Bristol, you can see it. Preply is the educational institute that professionally conducted the research from November 2nd to 7th, 2022. To ensure that the responses were from the angle of knowledge and understanding of the issues involved, not out of speculations, participants in the survey needed residency of at least 12 months in the cities. About 47.04% of respondents identified as male, while 52.96% identified as female. In their response, they were required to calculate the rudest and most polite cities. On what basis? They're asked to state how often they see 12 common disrespectful behaviours in their city of residence. The resulting data were used to calculate an average rudeness score for each city, and that formed the basis for the ranking. Of the cities surveyed, the most polite are Sheffield, scoring 4.90, Derby 4.90, Bradford 4.94, and Manchester 5.09. Those are the cities whose residents conducted themselves most acceptably for generosity, welcoming, kindness and other virtues. Here on this channel, we have a video about the most polite cities in the UK. It'll tell you more about those cities and their scores. How does Bristol fare? Bristol, unfortunately, holds the unpleasant and unwelcome title of the rudest city in the UK. It came out top on the table, scoring an average of 5.84 on the rudeness scale as against the national average score of 5.40. The survey found that residents are slow when it comes to welcoming outsiders. Locals tend to point to a certain feeling of insularity while explaining their behaviour. Many of them have learnt to keep to themselves and mind their businesses while growing up in a busy city. Could this have caused some misunderstanding among Bristolians? We ask because Bristol is also one of the most progressive cities. The residents are naturally forward-thinking by nature. They place a high value on politeness. Don't forget that such minds with that level of support for equity may breed oversensitivity to rudeness. If that is the case, it shouldn't be surprising that Bristolians rank many of one another as rude in their responses to the questions contained in the said survey. Bristolians may have been more self-critical. Besides, Bristol is an international city. Meanwhile, such cities often teem with different views on what's acceptable and unacceptable in public conduct and etiquette. The resulting cultural misunderstandings may also result in behaviours considered rude by the rest of Britons, whereas it means nothing more than normal day-to-day activities to Bristolians. Other cities in the top 3 rudest cities are Hull in second place with a total average score of 5.74. Coventry is third with a score of 5.70. In the 4th position is Glasgow with a score of 5.57. Edinburgh with a score of 5.54 finds itself in the 5th position, tying with London. We also find Leeds with a score of 5.52 in the 7th position. Far away, Belfast even has rude residents, making the 8th rudest city. Despite being an illustrious city, Birmingham is the 9th rudest city, while the calm Newcastle complete the list. You can check our video about the 10 rudest cities in the UK and find our observations on each of them. Most common rude behaviours. Now let's focus on certain peculiar behaviours common to Bristolians that are considered rude. Analysing the data, Preply found that the most common rude behaviours in the UK in general include people being absorbed by their phones, being noisy in public and not acknowledging strangers. Thus, isn't it unexpected to rise in a city like Bristol that has been marked as the rudest city in the country? Actually, we found that to an average Bristolian, it isn't a big deal if people impatiently jump in queues. It's actually more common in the city than elsewhere in the UK. While the British consider this a serious sin, it's kind of normal in Bristol. Also, when it comes to giving tips, Bristolians appear to be somewhat tight-fisted, giving too poorly, if at all. Bristol also fares poorly, ranking third after Coventry and Edinburgh on being absorbed by mobile phones in public. To corroborate all that, let's give you some figures about how Bristol fares in each of the 12 rude behaviours it's noted for. Bristol scores on the 12 conducts. As just mentioned, Bristol is among the leading cities where residents are too absorbed in mobile phones in public. It scores 6.92, led only by Edinburgh scoring 7.02 and Coventry scoring 7.22. As a visitor to this city, you have to be watchful if you don't want to collide with a dude who has been carried away in a phone conversation or who has been taken to another world by the oozing rhythmic beat from his headphones. The sight is all too common and it heralds another rude behaviour. Another rudeness is not slowing down when driving near pedestrians. No cities leads Bristol on this with a score of 6.20. Even the cities of Hull, Leeds and Glasgow, where these are common, came just second, third and fourth respectively, with scores of 6.19, 6.14 and 6.09. Still on rude conduct behind the wheel, let's talk about not letting others merge in traffic. Bristol scores 5.84 for this, as opposed to the national score of 5.24. It's second only to Leicester on this, which scores 6.07 to lead the rest. So if you have to drive your car in Bristol, please don your cap of caution. On the behaviour of being noisy in public, inexcusable acts in Victorian Britain, Bristol scores 6.10 against the overall UK score of 5.82. For not respecting personal space, Bristolians also score highly, scoring 6.03, which is way higher than the national average of 5.55. For the rude behaviour of not tipping, the stingy Bristolians lead every other city in the UK with a score of 5.90. The closest city is Birmingham, which scores 5.46, while the national average is 5.13. If an American tips $5 or a Bristolese pub, restaurant or hotel, he'll be tipped for the next mayor of the city. They're not used to receiving tips. For not acknowledging strangers, Bristol scores as high as 5.97. This makes the city the fifth rudest for this conduct. Hull scoring 6.57 leads on this, followed by Edinburgh scoring 6.00, next by Birmingham scoring 5.80, and by London with a score of 5.98. You don't really need a figure to see that Bristol is rude, considering how easy it's for Bristolians to ignore strangers for the reasons we've stated earlier. Can't they be a bit more accommodating even if they have values to protect? Well, what do you expect to see in a city where everyone is absorbed in their phones in public? Hey, Miss Visitor, no one has a second for you here. For closed-off body language, our city scores 5.61 against 5.13, which is the country's average score. On this also, Bristol is in the clear lead as the rudest, with Edinburgh's score of 5.49 being the closest. What about being rude to service staff? With a score of 5.48, Bristol is not found behind here also. It is second only to Hull, which scores 5.90. Our hearts go out to you if you are working in Bristol's services sector. We mentioned jumping queues earlier. Yes, Bristol scores 5.44 on this to lead the table of this rude behaviour as against the country's score of 5.02. When it comes to watching videos in public, it also leads with a score of 5.31, while the national score is 5.25. Finally, it does not fare differently for rudely talking on a speaker in public, where it scores 5.31 as against the national score of 4.93. On this, it is behind Coventry, which scores 6.00, and Hull's, which scores 6.10. Do you agree that Bristol is the rudest city in the United Kingdom? Please let's have this discussion continued in the comment section by sharing with us your candid opinion. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.